Welcome to another edition of the Beyond Data Management podcast. As always, powered by HS GovTech. I'm your host, Cameron Garrison. Thank you so much for spending some time with us here today. My guest today doesn't really need an introduction to a lot of you, but for those of you that are going to be meeting him for the first time, we'll give him an introduction here. We're going to be joined here today by Chirag Bhatt. And just he would have a spot on this show if I'd never met him before. His career and the story is just fascinating, but I happen to count him as a dear friend. I believe, and he'll double check me on this here in a second, I believe we're about 21 years since we first met and started working together, and not just really good at what he does, but a really good quality guy. Also happens to be currently here with us at HS GovTech, and we're so happy to have him. Shurog has now been in public health for over 40 years. Started as an inspector, ended up as a bureau chief, City of Houston, one of the larger departments in the country, before going into the private sector for quite a while. And now he's working to share his knowledge, experience, and information with health departments around the country through HS GovTech, helping them do what he did back in 2003, 2004, implementing a brand new system in the City of Houston. So without further ado, Chirag, and in studio. It's a nice studio, isn't it?
It is. It's wonderful. Thank you, Cameron.
Thanks for being here and for doing it in person. The last several we did. So we were kind of in a temporary home for the first couple episodes, actually on the West Coast. It was really hard to get to, even though we travel a lot. And we didn't mention it in the last ones, but we're actually at the Charlotte Motor Speedway. Here where HS is headquartered in Charlotte, North Carolina. Well, they're not headquartered at the Speedway, but I think people know what we mean.
It's a wonderful facility.
It really is.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful place, and very happy and glad that they let us utilize this for the Beyond Data Management podcast. But really, we've been trying to get this one scheduled for quite some time, and it's really fitting that you'd be the first in-studio guest in our new kind of permanent home for the show. So let's just start by, I'd like to address the audience specifically and also have you chime in on this. So we dropped the first episodes of this show just 2 weeks ago. We're recording on a Friday. Obviously, we're not live, so we're recording on a Friday. And we dropped the first episodes 2 weeks and 2 days ago. And truly just overwhelmed by the response and the reaction from the community. The number one reaction that I've gotten, and I'll tell you all now, you can reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you at beyond@hscloudsuite.com. Whether it's a comment on a show, whether it's an idea for a show, or you want to be a guest, you've got something pressing you want to talk about. But the number one comment was pretty short, like literally these words multiple times, about time. And I had them check before we went on. We're on all platforms where podcasts are available, from YouTube to Spotify, Amazon, Apple. There's a lot of them actually that are out there. But the episodes that have released so far in the last 2 weeks have netted out 25,000 folks. And the other thing the data showed is that they're watching it almost all the way through. Now, I can tell you, you know this as well as I do, it is not because of a guy with questionable taste in sports jackets that, not young enough to be called young anymore, not old enough to be called old. There is a term for it, but I don't much like that term, middle age. But all that to say, it's not me, it's not us, it's not even necessarily the studio. It is the people that come on and the message that they carry. It is something that you and I have talked about for years.
Yeah.
Is doing the lack of a sort of community gathering spot for the environmental health community and those professionals to be able to hear other people's stories, be inspired, learn, and share ideas and information. What are your thoughts so far on it? I know you've gotten some feedback as well, and I'm really humbled at the response to date.
And, I think, Cameron, the podcast, as you say, that people have been commenting, what were you waiting on? It's something that the environmental health community lacks. There are millions of podcasts that are available and subject A through Z, but something that is very dedicated to the public health profession is an overdue process. There are some other agencies that are doing the podcast on a regular basis, but the flavor and the tone that we're using for this particular podcast is a little bit different. Like you said, people share their stories, people share their experiences, and people want to know.
Yeah, they do.
A good sports coat or not, it really doesn't matter because your background in journalism, it shows that you know how to handle this type of platform. So people that are watching, people that are listening, I think this is probably very prudent for you to like the podcast and subscribe to it. Most of the time when you see a video or something on YouTube,
like and subscribe.
People will say like and subscribe, like and subscribe. So thumbs up and like. So let's do it and let's go from here.
Yeah, this is the internet world part of that from a media perspective. It's totally new to me, and that like and subscribe. I've made jokes, about people my young adult kids' age, saying that on the regular, but it actually does help the algorithm, however that works, to find other people in the community like you. So,
and it encourages the host and the company that's actually doing it that, hey, there are so many people that appreciate the content because it's all about the content.
Yeah. Are we screaming out into the void or doing something that is of value to people? So it's really great to have you here. Why don't we start back at the beginning? I didn't mean to date you. As you tell people, you started when you were about 12. So 40 years, not really anything. But I talk to a lot of people about this. Environmental health is not something that typically, kids will say, I want to be a firefighter. I want to be an athlete. As you get older, you start to temper and get a little more realistic with the dream. But still, that's not usually widely on the list. How did you find your passion for it and end up there? And I'll let you tell your story from there because you started as an inspector.
Yeah, it's a long journey. So when I first came to the U.S., 1980, a friend of mine told me about the government positions and how you can apply for a state exam, if you will, an aptitude test. And so I did that, and one of the position was the environmental health specialist or sanitarian or a food inspector. And based on your score, they will give you a preference. If you put a preference city as Houston first, then if you scored high, then you would probably get an opportunity. So that's how I was interviewed, and I was asked a bunch of questions, and they asked me, so when can you start? I said, couple of weeks. He said, no, can you start Monday? So that's how the journey started.
So 40 years ago, as now, they're always short inspectors.
Yeah. And it always will be.
Yeah.
It always will be.
Because, and one of the things we hope with this, and this alone can't solve that problem, but it's an obscurity, a labor in obscurity, or at least it has been for way too long. So you said something, government jobs, you said. So did you go in to take an aptitude test specifically targeting the health department?
Yes.
Or, okay, so you did.
Yeah, it was a Texas Workforce Commission that did the testing.
So what educational did you have? Did they make you go do anything else? Or if they wanted you to start like tomorrow, you were ready to go?
I have a bachelor's degree in chemistry and biological sciences.
Which is what they look for.
So this is something close to what the sanitarian or the environmental health position would require. And apparently I met the minimum qualification. If you ask me what kind of questions were asked on the aptitude test, I'd probably be lying to you if I told you that this was one of the questions.
Do they still do that?
No.
Yeah, because I didn't think so.
No, they don't do that anymore.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing, you think?
I have mixed feelings about it because, sometimes the aptitude test or the SATs or whatever type of entry-level exam people do, it shows what your education is, but it's not going to show you what your real-life experience is. And that's what matters in this field. In the environmental health science or environmental health inspection field, science doesn't really matter much. Your experience matters a lot more. How do you deal with public? How do you deal with coworkers? What do you do when a pressure comes up?
And so they started you like right out of the gate, right? You went into the um, field. How quickly after you started did they start throwing you out into the field?
Within a month of doing some orientation and understanding what the process is, what the uh, rules that you will be enforcing and how to do it, etc. I was put in a field, assigned to a district, and start inspecting day to day.
And they hazed you a little bit, didn't they? Back in the day,
Yes.
they handed you
Yes.
the tougher cases, or they put you in a bad part of town, or
Yes. Yeah, there's some stories that I should not even repeat here, but I was put in a very strange geographical district when I first started with the city of Houston. And it was scary because I was not only new to the city, I was new to the culture. I was new to the understanding. Granted that the medium of teaching where I finished my college was English, so the language was not an issue. However, when you come from India, your language, your pronunciation, your dialect is a little bit different than what people in Texas
well,
are used to.
And Texas has its own special version of
Absolutely.
it. It's English, but it's their own special thing.
It's
So how long was it roughly from the time you established living here and you were actually on the street regulating? It sounds like it was quick.
It was very quick. Yeah, so
Wow.
within 6-7 months after I came to the U.S., I was out doing public health service.
Maybe one story here. You don't have. You can just wave me off and say no. But the was it a barbecue joint or the guy who basically mocked your name and your response was or asked you where you're from?
Yeah.
Good old boy.
Yep.
It sounds like. But,
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah, so we were, after I finished my training and I was in the field and I was assigned to an inspection area, different than the first ever assigned district. We were inspecting a meat market, and needless to say, they had a lot of sanitation issues. So, and at that time, I was actually training somebody else. So when we told the operator that he's going to have to shut down to clean up, he flat out just asked me, "And where are you from?" I paused a little bit and I said, "Right here, Pasadena, Texas." And the guy just looked at me and just had the strangest look on his face. And he said, "Well, I don't care where you from. I've been running this business for 45 years and you're not going to tell me what to do in my business." I said, "Well, guess what? You will have to do it today."
That changes today.
Yes.
Year 46 is going to be different. There's a new sheriff in town.
Yeah.
So how long were you in the field? And then was there a step between the field and bureau chief? Or continue your story
Yeah,
from there?
I did many levels of the sanitarian position with the city of Houston position. I did training of certification classes. I did pre-opening, plan reviews. And then I became a first-line supervisor in about maybe 12, 15 years.
You were in the field a long time.
Yeah,
Wow.
yeah.
Suffice it to say, you found it. You must have found it rewarding, and because you're smart, educated, you could have made more money at that early stage of your career. What kept you there in that grind during those early first decade?
And, the passion to protect public health. And I think one time I heard somebody say this to me when a question exchange happened. "And what do you do?" I said, "I'm a food inspection person with the city of Houston." "Oh, I thought you were a doctor," because I was wearing a lab coat.
Okay, so actually, the great David Stiles in the control room, we have the picture here. Now, obviously, in a multi-platform, I just want to acknowledge a lot of people listen like in their cars, on their iPhones, on Spotify, and things like that. So there's not video there. So if you are listening to the audio, we'll give you a quick description. If you're on the video feed on YouTube, you can see it. Wow, that was quite a minute ago, wasn't it? You did wear a white lab coat.
Yes.
Is that a pocket protector I see in there?
No.
No?
No.
Okay, it's the glare.
No, it's just the glare.
And a mustache, rocking a
Oh,
mustache.
yeah.
What year was that roughly? Was that right around 1980?
Ooh, that must have been 1982.
Wow. So that is you, moment in time, back in the field.
I was 14 at that time.
What was always in the case?
All the inspection equipment, the thermometer and the test kit and the back in those days, remember we used to write reports with
Yeah, I was going
your
to say there was
paper.
nothing with a battery really in it in there, was there? Because it
No.
didn't exist.
No, we didn't have tablets back then. It was all paper and pen.
In triplicate.
Yes. Back then, we actually had to insert a carbon paper in between two pages
Oh, man.
so that we can write through. And God forbid if the carbon paper been used for 3 days, then you're out of luck.
Well, HS GovTech, I got a client recently. We won't name them because it's. But what's interesting is I actually saw carbon paper as the method of inspection collection very recently from a small agency here in the U.S. And so there's still actually a few where that's hanging on.
So do they still sell that?
Yeah, that's a really good point. Where do they get
Next
it?
time I go to Office Depot, I'm going to have to check it.
I bet you it's on Amazon.
It's probably somewhere.
Or maybe they have to do an RFP for a custom order of our...
So going back to the story, so the guy says, I thought you were a doctor. No, I do this. He tells me something that I still remember. He said, you're better than a doctor. So I said, okay, please explain. He said, doctor will take care of you once you get sick. You're making sure that we don't get sick.
That actually makes sense.
It makes 100% accurate sense.
And you told him food inspector. If you had the same experience, obviously I was never an inspector or anything, but you talk to people and they're like, what do you do? And like, work with environmental health departments. And the last guess that they usually could ever come to is that is regulation, permitting, inspections of restaurants, childcare centers, pools. They think I think maybe it's the word environmental, but they think that something with the saving the oceans or clean air, because it's not very descriptive to a outsider that doesn't know anything about it.
No. People may think you're a tree hugger.
Yeah. Well, it does sound like something that's environmental movement driven.
Absolutely.
The reason I asked is because it caught my attention that you said I'm a food inspector.
Yeah.
Because that is much more descriptive.
Yeah.
And was there a lot of media attention on it back then? Or because I know that later on Houston had a very famous segment. In fact, actually, I think we have a picture of you with Marvin Zindler.
Yeah.
And we're going to a couple of pictures super early here, but Marvin actually is a really interesting character. He was it the ABC affiliate in Houston?
Yeah. He's a very flamboyant investigative reporter. Every Friday night, he did a restaurant report.
Slime in the ice machine.
Slime in the ice machine. And he would come in and collect his reports that he would be talking about on air on Friday. And then at the end of his segment, he will always end, have a good weekend, good golf, good tennis, or whatever makes you happy.
He was a character, wasn't he?
He was a true character. But in real life, he was just a superhuman being.
He was a great guy.
Great guy.
And so what's interesting is reason I have some affection for Marvin as well is I was doing a very similar thing 27 years ago, where you mentioned he goes and would pull the copies because, again, there was no digital system, so you didn't have a website you could go pull this off of. So I would go down from Charlotte, North Carolina. I'd go down to the Mecklenburg County Health Department every week because, as you mentioned earlier, been in environmental health as a passion for 25 years. But before that, I was in broadcasting. And how I found EH was through slime in the ice machine or doing restaurant inspections. So when you have 3 hours of radio to fill a day and you don't play music, you're always looking for something to keep it moving.
Yeah.
And one day I'm like, you know what? That's interesting. There's a C on the wall of this restaurant. What's that mean? Figured out what that meant. I'm like, that's amazing. They had rats running around and I ate there. And so I started going out once a week and pulling the inspections, just like Marvin. And then we would publish them for the public. Later on, we put ourselves out of business there with actually working with the health departments. But the media they couldn't drive you to a website in the 80s. And so the visibility, I guess, long word salad way of getting to the point is ultimately there's more visibility on it today than there ever has been, but it's still not enough.
Social media is here. And, anytime somebody sees something in a public food establishment, they're going to take a picture or a video and post it on Instagram, Twitter, or X, or Facebook, or TikTok nowadays. And it's going to spread. and God forbid it's someone famous who's got a much bigger follower, it's detrimental to the organization, to the company, to the location. Because once you get on Instagram and somebody shows a live ad, it's over.
Yeah, it's hard to unring that bell, isn't
Yeah.
it? Like that's too bad at that point.
Yeah.
You're screwed.
And, now in this world of AI, people can even create something that may not be an actual fact.
You know the episode from what we had recently with Patrick from I Was Poisoned.
Mm-hmm.
They've had to put things in their platform for exactly that, where actually they'll require in some cases that you scan the receipt from the restaurant that you were at to prove that you were there, and they're using some AI and OCR technology to say, okay, that's not a made-up receipt, that's real, because they're seeing exactly what you said. They're seeing more of people, I don't know whether they're trolling for money in a lawsuit or just clicks on the internet, but it's happening.
Yeah, the motivation could be different, but yeah, it's still going to hurt the facility.
Yep.
Because, many times people will not find out what the actual truth was.
That's right. So we're going to back up on this topic quickly, but you've been in the field, you worked at different levels, you were doing the certification trainings.
Yeah.
Was the next big leap to the big chair bureau chief?
Yeah. Yeah. So the last 15 plus years, I was with the regulatory position. I managed the program in Houston, 13,000 food establishments, about 70 people, field inspection, supervisors, and administrative staff.
It was a big team.
Big team.
And that actually, so 15 years, was it difficult to stay? And especially in a city this size of Houston, a lot of politics, and we're going to be getting into some of that as we go through the episode, just funny stuff that you had to deal with. That's a lot of longevity in a city that size in the bureau chief role, isn't it?
It is. It is. It was a long time. We made a lot of adjustments. We made a lot of changes. Was not very popular at times. However, you as a bureau chief or a program manager, you have a responsibility to make sure that the public health is protected. And as long as that's your passion, little things here and there should not bother you.
You have an interesting way of just
shake it off.
Yeah. And under, as we'll talk about later, under intense political scrutiny.
Yep.
We're going to talk about, I actually got to witness it because you drug my butt down there to the meeting. but we definitely will get into that. So 15 years, and you I met you, I think, 2003?
Yes.
2003 for the first time.
Yeah.
I'll never forget the first time I met you, because that was early days, and I was working with health departments with digital health that we had founded. And I drove in my car. So we were introducing a new concept completely.
Yeah.
Like the internet was just becoming a thing.
Yeah.
And so the concept of the internet, which up to that point, people were like, I can make Beanie Babies on eBay with it. Like it was a very different internet for those of you that are older like us and remember that. And that was a really slow uptake concept of this internet page will store all your data and you can trust it. So we were not flying around in first class, still don't, or anything, but I drove. And the reason I am saying that is I think I was 40 minutes late to you. I don't know if you're...
I don't remember.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Being gracious. He forgave. But I was late because I got lost around the medical center where you guys were at the time. And I was so flustered. And but it was the first time I met you. And I think within about a year, you were actually implementing a system.
Yeah.
You then took kind of a radical turn. And after 15 years, and as the bureau chief, you left Houston, you left the government service, and we worked together starting in 2007, right? 2007, and worked together for 3 years there after that. And you started working with departments on the flip side because you had just come off of implementing a system, and a lot of people still didn't have their arms around where to go with new technology. We worked together there for 3 years, and then you went back into food safety, but you went to the industry side. So tell us
Correct.
about what happened from there, and because you went to some pretty big names.
Yeah, I went to work with a restaurant company as a global food safety manager position. They had over 1,500 restaurants in U.S. and about 200 in the global market. And that was a brand new position with the company. So I did a lot of great things with the company, establishing the standard operating procedures, created outside company doing the audits and providing health department intelligence. And we actually moved the needle in the right direction of being there and making sure that the locations throughout the company bought into the concept that food safety is important.
Is that you want to say the name or you don't want to
Yeah,
say?
Bloomin'
Bloomin'
Brands.
Brands. So
Bloomin'
Outback
Brands.
Steakhouse,
Yeah.
right? And so what's remarkable to me about that is this was what 2011, 10,
2012 is
12.
when I started.
So up until 2012, Outback Steakhouse, which had been through their huge, growth before then, they didn't have that position at all.
They did not.
Wow.
A consultant actually recommended to the CEO, and they ended up having a 3 newly created position, and I was one of them.
So you had to build the entire culture
Yeah.
there from scratch, didn't you?
Yeah.
Wow. Then you went. I have to mention this because one of the other places that you were has a cult. I don't think there's any fair way to say it other than a cult following. And if I'm being honest, which we try to always be on this channel, I kind of am among the cult followers. Buc-ees, right?
Yeah.
Tell them about what Buc-ees is, because it's really a destination, but they're not in every state. And then maybe talk about and the differences between a sit-down restaurant like a Bloomin' Brands or an Outback and what does Buc-ees call themselves? You tell it from here. I mean, it's a gas station, but it's also a small Walmart-sized store with beaver nuggets and everything else in it. So there must also have been some differences. But you went to Buc-ees, and tell us a little bit about that and maybe the differences between those types of businesses.
Yeah, so Buc-ees, I call it convenience store on steroids, because some of their newer locations were 50,000 square foot and above.
They're
So,
huge.
like you said, it's like a mini Walmart, literally, and they don't have a sit down facility. You go in, you buy your food, pick up your bags and your beaver nuggets and the fudge and whatever else you want to buy, and you walk out. Most of the time, people will sit in their car and consume their lunch or dinner,
The
whatever the
barbecue's
case
really
may
good.
be. Yeah. And I worked with them as a food safety and QA director for about 2 years. And the difference between a sit-down restaurant and a convenience store that's on steroids is huge, because the challenges are different. One, you have a dining facility, so you got to take care of all the situation that circles around it. Whereas at a convenience store, most of the time people are coming in, buying, paying, putting it in a bag and walking out. So there's a little difference there as far as the dynamics is concerned. However, the food preparation and the food safety process and the protocols, they remain the same. Whether you're serving it on a plate to somebody in your dining area or you're putting it in a package and handing it to them, the food has to be safe and wholesome.
You had to deal with a lot more around almost like manufactured
Correct.
and packaged labeling
Correct.
at Buc-ees, right? Because they have a lot of things that are jarred or canned.
Co-process, yeah. So you had to do a lot of visit and inspections and QA check at manufacturing facilities that did the co-packing for the company.
You've had to fire a manufacturing facility before, haven't you?
We did, yeah. And when they don't follow, and when the manufacturing facility, they don't understand what food safety is, or what GFSI means, or what FSQ means. Some of this lingo and the terminology and the acronym, and you see the look on their face, say, oh, really? And you've been doing it for 10 years or 15 years? So yeah, luckily the company supported the idea that, hey, if they're not clean and if they're not wholesome products that's coming out of that facility, we need to change direction.
amazing they wouldn't take it seriously as a manufacturer because Buc-ees must be a massive account
Huge.
with the
Huge.
traffic that they get.
Yeah.
Yeah. So all kind of builds up to this very similar role, but one's in the public side. The other is with industry, with a facility who needs to protect their brand and their customers. There should be a nexus, right? Or a partnership of collaboration of some sort between industry and the agencies. However, a lot of people say that there is Matt Geller was on here a few weeks ago for talking about food trucks, and he talked about the contention or the perception of contention, almost like we need to hide from these. The restaurants want to hide from the regulators. Uh, they view the regulators maybe as heavy-handed, but in reality, they're both supposed to be working both ends towards the middle of the same goal, right?
Yeah, Cameron, the fact is that when I first started in the public health and the food safety and the environmental health side, that was the case, that agency versus industry. The restaurant operator, the grocery store operator, whether it's a chain or an individual family-owned operated facility, they always see the regulatory person coming into their facility as an enemy.
Yeah.
But in the last 15, 20 years, I think the dynamic is shifting a little bit, primarily based on the fact that many times, let's say a regulatory agency, stakeholder organization is doing an annual conference. In the past, you would see 90% predominantly the regulatory attendance. But in the last few years, as I said, you see a lot more industry representatives showing up because they're trying to do the same final ultimate result, protecting public health. And in the case of the industry, it's brand protection.
Yeah.
Because you don't want something to happen at your location and then pay the consequence. Because I remember many times when I was with the restaurant company, norovirus, one example, when the outbreak happens, you have to shut down. And you may have to shut down for 2 to 3 days to make sure that the entire facility gets cleaned up.
That's expensive.
And when that happens, the operator has to put a sign on the front door to let the customers know that this is the reason why it's shut down. And once people find out, and in this day and time with the social media, people will know whether the industry announces that and becomes transparent or not. People will find out. And then it takes a year or year and a half in some cases for that particular location to recover and come back to the level that they were at.
What do you think they're still missing or that could be done yet still to enhance the cooperation between the regulatory agency and industry? I think you're uniquely qualified for that because you've sat on both sides of that table.
It may be a selfish plug here, but it's a better data management. And when the regulatory agency will not provide information to the regulated component by not being transparent, because, in order for you to get this, you have to do this. But if it is available online, it's a lot easier. So from the industry perspective, when an agency provides the data to them that, hey, the last 5 inspections you had this common item show up on your report. Why can't you do something about it? Why can't you buy a $3 thermometer and put it in your walk-in cooler?
Yeah.
So something like that.
Yeah.
So many times the operators don't know. And that's where the missing link is.
Especially
and I think,
in a chain setting, right?
Yeah.
Because corporate or the ownership, they have 100, 1,000 locations. And if they can't go pull that data, how do they know to even hold their own local management accountable?
Yeah, and it's just so difficult for them to monitor and balance because, like you say, 1,000 location, and their locations are all over the country. And the agency A versus B versus D and F, they're all doing their inspection documentation in a different way. there is a national trend of people trying to be consistent and uniform. And hopefully it'll happen soon. Hopefully
Yeah.
before I retire.
It's heading that way.
Yeah,
And we're both aware there's some projects on the drawing board now that I think actually will serve that.
yeah, uniformity in the national program retail standards that many of the regulatory agencies, state or local, are using and implementing will probably get us there. But let's keep our fingers crossed that it happens soon.
Now, there'll probably always be situations like this, but there's a story, and I know it because you tagged me into it, and so I got to observe it, become a part of it. I have to say though, kidding aside, I had my respect grew so much for you after observing that meeting. So I'll set the stage, and then you tell the story. Was it 05 or 06? Not that it matters. Somewhere in there, right? Or was it? Maybe it was earlier. It doesn't matter. Somewhere in that 03 to 05 range. You called me. You had just recently gone live with DHD, and you were getting ready to pull the trigger on exactly what you were talking about, getting the inspections online so they can be accessed.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a few people didn't like that, were there?
Yep.
And I remember you called me, and I thought I was done for the week. Like it was like with a couple days notice, if I recall, and you're like, want to come to Houston? And you made the right call, because what I didn't realize when you called me is you were under attack. And so I show up to a meeting, and representatives from the mayor's office, maybe the chief of staff, but don't want to be wrong about that. Somebody from the mayor's office and the restaurant association. And if I recall, they were sitting on the same side of the table, weren't they?
Yes.
And it was you and me on the other side and some of your staff. Tell that story, because that was fascinating to me, that interplay. And in that particular instance, it felt like they were trying to muscle you guys.
Yeah, I think it was in 2005 when we rolled out the technology platform in Houston, and the industry in Houston area, the Restaurant Association and the Grocery Store Association and the political office. They were not comfortable with the restaurant results being published online.
They were not.
And so we had to stay on our mission, our goal, to be transparent. And we came to a compromise, which I thought was a win-win situation. And I think if you remember, we ended up kind of diluting the actual inspection report. So instead of it saying slime in the ice machine, the public information portal will say food contact equipment not being clean.
Yep. So
it actually left the customer and the citizen to so many different imagination. However, that made the industry happy and the politics.
And you still got the information out.
And yeah.
And you got to still cite the violation code and reference. Yep. And if I recall, was there a 24 or 40-hour period where if the report was really bad, like they got hammered, they couldn't find the fairway with two hands and a flashlight, that they had a period of time to get re-inspected, a couple days, and if after the re-inspection happened, both inspections would be posted, but you would wait and post the one from, let's say, Monday on Wednesday when they had been re-inspected, so that there was a little bit more balance, so that people knew, okay, this happened, but they've now remediated it, and it again kind of helped them calm down a little bit.
Yeah.
Their initial bid to you, though, if I recall in the meeting, was the website dies, right?
Yes.
That's what they wanted.
Yes. Initially, that was the idea. Yeah. They did not want it to be published, and I think the compromise was a win-win situation on both sides.
It worked. And it was just fascinating to me. It was really early in my career, like 5 years in working with departments, to see the mayor's office was pretty sympathetic to the restaurant association.
Yes.
And then you told me afterwards, they're the largest campaign contributor in the city to certain offices.
Hey, as we know, money talks, right?
Yeah, and that is actually, though, still a thing, right? The restaurant
It
associations are still politically active. They are usually somewhere in the top few donors in local races, which gives them the ability to request a meeting and put pressure on.
But the restaurant association or the grocery store association, as we talked earlier, I think their dynamic has changed as well. they are also, by attending some of these joint conferences and stuff, understand that the regulatory agency is not their enemy. So they're also coming to terms a little bit, and they're a little more open to having a transparent, open communication, if you will, because ultimately it's going to help them too.
Yeah.
And it's got to be a mutual consent, if you will. So,
and you were on the bleeding edge. I think one of the reasons you caught so much heat then is in '05, it was the exception, not the norm,
yeah,
for an agency to put all of that online.
yeah,
I think now that ship has sailed.
yeah.
The majority do it to some capacity. But there are still times it comes up with departments. They talk to us about it all the time.
Yeah.
You're getting a little heat, or why did you have to put that on there? Or don't put everything out there.
Yep. And there are some agencies that are still doing it both ways.
There are.
One will do a complete transparent inspection report. One will have a very generalized documentation, if you will. So that's fine.
And I have to say, I'm not busting on industry, maybe a little bit, like getting the mayor to try to take your side. That was aggressive. But if I owned a restaurant, I would also be concerned about media sensationalism. A Marvin Zindler, like we were talking about, or back 27 years ago, a Cameron Garrison is going to, really hit you over that slime in the ice machine, which is not the most deadly violation ever. It's not great, but not on the list of things that'll kill you the most. And I get it. I get they're concerned. Like you said, they have to protect their brand, and there has been issues before with sensationalism. So
yeah, and the other thing, Cameron, and the industry's biggest point on inspection results being shared online is, and honestly, it is my opinion as well, that it is a snapshot. When you see an inspection, the manager was having a rough day, or the employee who's responsible for cleaning the exhaust hood was ill, and then they haven't had a chance to get that done. So if you go tomorrow or 2 days later, things could have been different.
Yeah, it's not their perpetual policy to do some of the things that they get marked for. In fact, to that point, not to keep prodding you for all of your stories, but where we were going to actually go next was talking about Conference for Food Protection, because I think that makes a lot of sense when you talk about now how industry is really stepping in and collaborating, because you can see it there big time, and we were just there about a month ago. But when we were there, you remember where was that gentleman from? He's still with from industry at CFP. Was that Outback or that?
No. So the gentleman at that time was with Olive Garden.
Olive Garden. So tell the story to the audience to see of how it is. Just bad things do happen. You were in an Olive Garden with. You can tell the position. You don't have to use his name if you don't want to. He told me the story, so I feel comfortable mentioning it, because he would still. By the way, he still blushed when he told me this story at CFP. But again, crazy stuff happens. Tell what happened and how mortified he was, because you were in the restaurant with him, and everybody knew that you're the bureau chief at the City of Houston Health Department, right? So it wasn't like you were there on a surprise inspection. You were just having lunch with him. Everybody knew who you were.
No, actually, it was just I had a meeting with him after lunch. So I had just returned from lunch, and I said, I am so glad you're here, because I got to tell you something. He said, all right, Chirag, tell me what happened. I said, I just had lunch at your location just down the street, and guess what I found in my iced tea? He said, what'd you find? I said, a nail clip. Fingernail clip. You should have seen the look on his face at that time. He says, no. I said, yeah. I was drinking it, and I was almost down to my last sip, and there is a little fingernail clipping floating on the bottom of my glass. He said, okay, after this, I'm going there straight and making sure that every single nail clipper is removed from the restaurant. He was so embarrassed.
Oh, he was.
And he still remembers
that.
He
still blushes when he tells the story. and he tells it like it was yesterday.
Yeah.
And he's like, Cameron, I was so mortified. He said something to me about, I told my people, do you realize what this guy can do to us? It was apparently employees were, when it was slow, clipping their nails, right?
At the drink station. Ooh.
Mm,
Mm.
wow.
So then I stopped drinking iced tea for a few years.
So it does. It happens to the best of us. I
It
believed
does.
his explanation. It wasn't intentional. They
No.
weren't targeting you because of who you were.
No.
It was a bad day
No,
at
they
that
didn't
particular
know who
Olive
I,
Garden.
Yeah, they didn't know who I was. So yeah,
It happens.
it does.
So I met him at CFP, and a great guy. But that is actually dovetails nicely off what you were just talking about. Waffle House was there.
Mhm.
There was I love, by the way, love Waffle House, and I think anybody who has had days when they were younger, whether it was a misspent youth or just a youth with a little bit of fun, the Waffle House is just perfect. At 2 a.m.
Mhm.
So I'm not knocking Waffle House, but you don't expect them necessarily to be at the table at the Conference for Food Protection. And yet they were, and a lot of the other restaurants, and they're very active in it, aren't they?
Yes, yes. So Conference for Food Protection is a body that's a nonprofit organization, and it really is a true democratic process. So it happens every 2 years. And I've been involved with the Conference for Food Protection since 1998. In many roles, I've chaired the council, I've chaired many committees, I've chaired many executive level committees. And so since the food code now is published every 4 years with updates and changes and amendments, the Conference for Food Protection happens every 2 years. So the gap between the conference and the time FDA pushes the new food code out is on purpose. So that if there is something in the food code that needs to be changed, revised, added, deleted, whatever the case may be, this body organization makes the recommendation to FDA. And this is based on not just someone's whimsical ideas, but someone has to be prepared when they submit an issue
To back it up.
to back it up. So it's got to have science, it's got to have data, it's got to have facts, it's got to have some numbers, it's got to have some charts, it's got to have some all bells and whistle in order for the committee to make a recommendation to the conference at the end that, hey, based on this, we recommend that conference send a request to FDA that the law in the food code needs to be changed from this to this.
And so CFP has a huge influence on the FDA food codes, and
Yes.
iteratively over time, all of them they have.
Correct.
Yeah, a lot of people who are watching know all about this, but there are some who don't. If you are recently into environmental health and maybe you're an inspector, you may not have gotten much of a primer yet on how is the food code created and what is the CFP I hear about. So maybe for those that don't know, walk us through the mechanics. I've been now the last two, Houston 2 years ago, and then we just got back from Denver. And I want to just take a second on that to just give a shout out to Troy at the state of Colorado. The state of Colorado, a state will host it every 2 years. It's a biennial Congress. And I'd say the state of we were very proud at HS to be a sponsor, but it was one of the best ones ever, just from a smoothness and the little touches and the food and the drink was fantastic.
Absolutely.
So to all the great folks at the state of Colorado, especially the Department of Health, which are great partners of HS GovTech, that was a job well done. And I would be the first to say to renominate Denver for one of the other ones in the future, because it really was great. As a matter of fact, there's these little artifacts linking. I'm sorry, David, I'm going way off script. There we go. That two-shot is the an award we got from them. But like even the little touches, like those were the table centerpieces, very well done. It was all done sort of in Rocky Mountain motif, and it was wonderful. But anyway, back to the core of that. 2 years ago in Houston. So I'm going to give you my really high level rudimentary understanding, and then you unpack it. You have several days there. The first couple of days where you divide it up into councils, right? And
Yes.
so it's everything from science, and you'll fill everybody in on what those are. And then I always explain it to people like it's almost like Congress, right?
Yes.
You want to make a law or you have a burning desire to change a law. You don't just go to the floor for a vote in the House of Representatives. It has to go through the committee process, and it gets marked up and it gets fought over, and people go on cable news and, stab each other in the back and try to get leverage. And if it makes it all the way through the council, and you'll describe that process, if it gets all the way through that, then on the last day of CFP, there are 2 elected representatives from every state. But this is actually more like the Senate at this point. You got 100 basically, and the territories have representation. Yeah. And then the items that the committee have recommended to the full elected body then get taken up on the floor and they go to a vote, right? Up or down. What stunned me the most, and I'm going to shut up and let you actually explain it because you chair committees there, so you're way more qualified. But what stunned me was 2 years ago in Houston, there was a really hot button. And people, on the day when the whole body had to vote, there were people printing up leaflets and walking around the hall whipping votes for how they saw a particular bill. And I'll never forget one lady, doesn't matter what state, again, it's a funny story, I'm not here to pick on anybody, but gave the spiciest speech I think I've ever heard in the context of environmental health. And basically told the delegates that she didn't know what they were smoking and they'd have to be insane to think that the other side's argument made sense. Somebody also alluded to the fact that, well, if you want to kill kids, so politics can get into everything. But I just wanted to share my observation of it. It's not a frictionless process, but it's very orderly.
It is.
And it ends up changing the law that governs how restaurants are inspected. So you chair a couple of the committees. Maybe walk us through, from your perspective, what was interesting this year and what came through the process.
Yeah, so the process, when someone submits an issue, it gets prepared, documentation is shared with the general membership and the council that will make a decision whether they should continue on with the recommendation from the issue or not, is based on the discussion that happens during the council session. So once that decision is made after the council deliberates on it, where they actually use parliamentarian procedure. So there are certain rules that you can say this, you can do this, but you can't do this, you can't say this, etc., etc. So once that process is complete, then on the last day, the delegates from the states meet. And the day before, most of these delegates will have a discussion or a meeting in the evening. So they are prepared that tomorrow, issue number 15 has to be pulled or extracted. So once the issue is extracted, apparently the state delegates are discussing whether they should continue on with the decision that was made at the council or not. And so if that extraction is successful, then that issue is dead.
Dead bill.
And it does not go anywhere. So once the delegation votes are captured, the council chairs and the CFP board will make the decision to write recommendation to FDA, USDA, etc., that this particular code section needs to be changed to this. And then the FDA will go through the process of reviewing it, making sure that the science and data supports it, and then they will make the ultimate decision whether this gets changed in the food code or not.
What generally, you may not know an exact percentage, but how much is it? More than half, less than half? What's kind of the adoption rate? If it goes all the way through, because CFP is a very orderly process with a parliamentarian, how often does it get ignored or kicked out by the FDA if it comes all the way through?
I would probably, again, I could be wrong, but I'd say 75% is accepted by FDA because most of the FDA representatives are also present during the council.
So they're not
discussion.
surprised. When it all lands in the FDA, they're not surprised.
Yeah. And many times the ones that they will not approve or pass along is primarily based on the fact that they will come back and say, this particular change is already addressed in section XYZ.
Yep.
And so most of the time, the reasons are compelling and supported. And sometimes they say, this is just not possible to enforce or regulate. So
which is a problem in lawmaking.
It
If you do
is.
something you can't regulate,
is.
it's a bad law.
yeah,
But it's fair to say in that 75-ish% range, that CFP has a huge outsized hold or impact on what the next FDA food code is going to be.
absolutely. And then that's why FDA will have a food code supplement, that because it's a 4-year cycle, and if something that has a really impactful decision, if you will, like let's say, for example, the food has to be stored at 41 or below as far as co-holding is concerned. And if the science supports that, no, it's got to be 39, then
Yeah.
FDA will do a amendment.
It's a very interesting process. And
But
this may be a question some people have, how do the delegates that represent each state, how do they get selected? And if there was someone who aspired to that after hearing all of this or learning about CFPs, like, I want to be on that delegate floor one day casting a vote on behalf of my state, how does that work?
most of the time, it's the state program managers that are the delegates. And in some states, that may be
So
three.
seniority.
Yeah. So there may be 3 positions. Like Washington, D.C. have half and half. So there are 2 votes because it's state and a local at the same time.
Yeah. And the territories get one, right? Like
Yes.
Puerto Rico,
Yeah.
they're all represented.
California, I think, has 3 because of the size.
Yeah, big
Yeah.
population. So some calculation based on that.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, it's usually selected from supervisors.
And
or
some
managers.
state will have a Department of Health and a Department of Ag. So there will be half and half. But it's still, each state only gets 1 vote.
That's right, because they would and they both. I'm trying to remember. Are there instances where did the delegates have to vote together, or can you have a half vote yes and a half vote no?
It happens. It could
I
happen.
thought it
Yep.
did
Yeah.
in Houston, at least, that
Yeah.
that the state basically canceled themselves out, right?
Mhm.
Because
Yeah.
like the household where the husband and wife just do not see politically eye to eye.
Yeah.
And they're really grumpy on election day because they know they're just going to cancel each other out. Yeah, it does
I
happen.
know one perfectly well.
All right. So before we wrap up, I want to definitely talk about technology because that's how I initially met you. And I was wrong. It was 22 years ago, not 20. So you implemented in that '04 a web-based system. You were one of the early ones, especially for a larger municipality. And so you've done that there. And then from digital health for over 3 years, you worked with around 100 health departments around the country, helping them kind of frame up and understand the decisions that they should make and how to go about things. So you have implemented it from the agency seat, and you've implemented from a vendor, that
Mhm.
traditionally as the government would call it, a vendor seat, and you're now here, and I don't think, and that's just a host mistake, I'm sorry, I don't think I actually used your title earlier. You're the Director of Regulatory Affairs here at HS GovTech. So you're not on the ground implementing, but you're there when the tough issues come up, which is there are times where policy conflicts with what you might want to do with your system. And there are all kinds of examples of that. And you now work with a lot of agencies, big ones around the country, helping them sort of see their way through that. So to summarize it to kind of a question that doesn't take 30 minutes for you to have to unpack, having done it, been there, done that, gotten the T-shirt for actually doing it at the 4th largest city in the country as the bureau chief, and then helping agencies do it now, even though the technology is way better, as we can personally attest to, but there are still challenges. And so if you had a director, and this happens to you frequently, if you were talking to an agency, not just a director, but a lot of times it is, and they're like, I'm this close. We know that the database, it could be Excel, it could be, we see a lot. And they need to do this. And again, I'm not agnostic on vendor, like any system, a new system of any type. There's trepidation, which is healthy.
Yes.
And if somebody was there and they're like, I'm going to have to pull the trigger on this, but I got some nerves, what would you tell them? What would be the first 1 or 2 pieces of advice that you would just say, hey, keep it between these lines and make sure you're thinking about this, and you'll be okay.
Hey, many times, Cameron, and it's a good point and a good question, that many times the regulatory agency that's using Excel or Access to do their data management, there's limitations. As a matter of fact, it's just not worth it. Might as well do triplicate paper and file the papers away. But many times the regulatory agency that are still not using technology platform to manage their data, they're thinking it's costly, it's prohibitive, but it's not. And especially in our company, we've done over 1,000 clients. So there is a system or two or 10 in some cases that is using something similar to the approach that you're using, the program that you're using, the modules you're using, the components of your regulations that you're using, your permitting, your pre-opening, your inspections, your complaint, etc. And it's very affordable, and it is very prudent. I think we talked about the data sharing availability because it helps the industry. It helps public health because there's better data management. And people should definitely look into, whether it's HS GovTech or not, you should definitely look into the solution. How can we do this better? The mitigation strategies. You're going to be able to go into the system and identify what are some of the headaches, what are some of the challenges that the facilities that you regulate in your area are going through. And based on that, you can enhance your educational effort and your training efforts to make public health your priority. So technology is here to stay. And with this AI introduction into this data management solution, it's going to be wonderful for regulatory agency to jump on the bandwagon and start using data management solution. There's just no doubt in my mind.
I do think it's on the cusp of a leap forward.
Yeah.
As so many other industries are, AI is going to do that. And I'm really excited about just what we do on our day job because what's out there is just mind-blowing. And as you know, there's a component that helps tie industry back from a training, knowledge, question servicing perspective that's just pretty powerful.
It is.
On that front, which is really, really exciting. You also did one thing. You mentioned it. It is actually way more affordable than a lot of people realize. But, agencies, especially with so much swirling in the headlines, the doging of this and the doging of that, there's legitimate fear out there. And you did something that, if the saying "there's nothing new under the sun" was ever true, I think this story kind of almost in summary really hits that. You had to go find the money for it in Houston back in the early 2000s. And I just would love to hear you explain to the listeners what you did, because it's not being done a lot, but it's very clever. So good, in fact, that it's still been used for years, even after you left, to pay for it. So talk about that permit surcharge that you cooked up and how that really helped move things forward.
Yeah, with the political stage that we're all experiencing at this time, about this cut and that cut and this reduction, etc., the local health department, whether it's a state or a local city or a county, yeah, they're probably going to be impacted right now. But I think in the long run, I do feel that the funding will be restored back to the agency where it belongs, because not a single politician wants their constituent to die from unsafe food. Because food safety or contaminated water. We're talking about environmental health. So directors, program managers can become creative, because nowadays when you go and pay a bill, you're going to see implementation fee, administrative fee, technology fee. Whatever the case may be, you as a director, you can probably create something that would add on certain amount to each license or certificate that you issue and support the system that you have to pay for. And as I say, it's probably not that bad of an expense for people to be using technology.
I'm going to be rough estimate. I think it was around 12, $13 or so back when you first introduced it.
Yeah.
So, permit in Houston's $400 or $500. And you were able to set up that surcharge that went literally, and not just to buy the software. What I really thought was so interesting about it is hardware was the bigger issue for you, right?
Mhm.
You had like 80 inspectors that needed new tablets every 2 years, and that paid for it.
Yeah, back in 2005, the tablets were $2,100 each.
Yeah, they were. And they sucked.
They do. They were like a brick.
Yeah. Remember the Tough Books?
Yes.
Oh my gosh. That is the worst device ever. Like back in the day, historically it was, but man, their demo was the best.
Yeah.
They would come to a government agency and like show you a video of a tank running it over. I saw a guy, I was in the room once and he scared everybody. He picks it up and throws it across the room at the wall and then opens it up and says, see, it still works.
And nobody's going to do that, right?
No. Although crazy things do happen
Oh,
with those
yeah.
tablets. There's a few that have lost their life to a septic tank incident. Let's just say that.
I bet.
You know, rice just doesn't quite dry everything out after floating it in a septic tank. Well, Shurog, we could literally go on and on and on. So let's do this. In the next couple of months, you'll be back in town, and we'll do a part 2 and have a lot of fun. Do you want to? I know we had one picture that we didn't get to, and I'm really the one that suffers in this. Like you've got that kind of forever youthful good look. Put that golf picture up. This was look at that baby face. That, you know how there was a fat Elvis period in his life, and that's the fat Cameron period. I'm 45 pounds lighter than I was today, but that was a lot of fun. That was 07 Niha, right?
08.
08 Niha.
Middle of July in Tucson, Arizona.
Yep.
116 degrees, but it was fun.
It was a lot of fun. We played in the scramble, and the highlight of it for me, so Chirag is the most infuriating person, I say that with all love, to play golf with. Like, if he's not under par or right at par after 17 or after 18 holes, something's wrong with him. And I love golf, but I suck at it. But I have this to my name from that. We played one of my shots.
Yes.
Blind squirrel finds a nut every so often, and I had one drive that was worthy of being played. It was a scramble at the Niha golf tournament. They don't do that anymore.
Yeah, we had some good players at that time, and we used your drive that time because we all sucked on that hole.
Chirag, we will have you back, and thank you for the friendship and being a great colleague over the last 20 plus years. And we will do a part 2 on some other topics that we just have time to get to today very soon.
It was fun. It really was fun.
And
Thank
for
you.
all the pictures and everything, if you are on one of the services where there's no video, we'll post those on the website, beyonddataManagementPodcast.com. If you weren't on one that had a video stream. And as we talked about at the top, this show is for you all, for the community. And so we, the team here on the show, Christina Miller, producer, we read every email. I personally read everything that comes in as well. I love getting it. And we've already gotten some great ideas, both for guests and also topics, things that I hadn't even really thought of yet. So thank you for that. And please continue to send that feedback and ideas beyond at hscloudsuite.com, beyond at hscloudsuite.com. Thanks to Chirag Bhatt. For all of us here at Beyond Data Management Podcast, I'm Cameron Garrison. Thank you so much for spending the past hour with us, and we'll see you again next week.